Alright, in this video we're going to be going over investigation 5.2.3. So, a couple quick warm-ups. If you want to find the answer, remember to cancel out a square, we can square root both sides. So I can square root the left and square root the right side. And notice that the square and the square root are going to cancel out. So x plus 5 equals, again, the square root of 64 has two versions. You can either be positive 8, because 8 times 8 is 64, or it can be equal to negative 8, because negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. So after subtracting 5 on both sides, x equals 3. Or if I subtract 5 on both sides, negative 5 and negative 8 make negative 13. So here we can solve for x. All right, for our next warm-up, same thing. We can square root both sides. So put both sides underneath the square root. All right, and notice that the square and square root are going to cancel out. So all we're left with x minus 4. And the square root of 36 has two answers. It can either be positive 6 or it can be equal to negative 6. Because 6 times 6 is 36, or negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. So adding 4 to both sides, x equals 10, or x equals to, let's see, cancel out, negative t. All right, and for the next one, again, we can square root both sides. All right, and notice that the square root and the square are going to cancel out. That's why we're only left with x plus 1. These two cancel each other out. And we know that square root of 5 doesn't have a nice square root. Square root of 5 is 2.23606. So for this one, we're going to leave our answer as exact. We're going to leave it as square root 5. So let's go in minus 1 on both sides. X equals square root 5 minus 1. Same thing over here. Square root of 5 can also be a negative version as well. Right? We know square root of 5 is around 2.2 something. And we know that negative 2.2 times negative 2.2 will be a positive 5. So same as before, we can subtract on both sides. And that's going to be square root 5 minus 1. So how can we generalize the process for completing the square? That's going to be our focus question. So here, notice that the square is not complete yet. We have 1x squared, 6 red x's, and plus 7. And it's not a complete square yet, so we can add plus 2 to the left side to make our box. But whatever we do to the left side, I need to do to the right. So notice that to complete the square, we added 2 to both sides. So now we're left with this equation. And if I want to factor this, again, it has the same base times height, x minus 3, x minus 3. And notice that each of the sections of the area model is correct. X times x is x squared, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, and x times negative 3 is negative 3x. So how many solutions does this one have? It's going to have 2 solutions. Remember when we square root a number, all right, square root both sides, you either be square root of 2 or be negative square root of 2. Again, we're going to leave our answers exact because square root of 2 is not a nice number. I think the square root of 2 is like 1.14 or something like that. Square root of 2 is 1.4. And we know that 1.4 times 1.4 is going to be 2, or negative 1.4 times negative 1.4 will be 2. So we're going to leave our answer as 2 different, positive and a negative version. So we'll add 3 to both sides. So plus 3. And we have this negative version, plus 3. So plus 3 to both sides. We're left with our answers. All right, here let's go and complete the square. We have an x squared. Usually I like putting these in the upper left-hand corner. We have 2 x's. Again, since it's a square, we're going to put 1 on the right side, 1 on the left side. And then we're going to have our box here. So complete the box. Again, we put 1x here, 1x here. So we have an x plus 1 and an x plus 1. Notice that when we multiply the same thing with itself, x plus 1 times itself, we can write this as the equation x plus 1 squared. Right, we have the same thing multiplied with itself. So this one only has one solution, and the reason for that is 0 doesn't have a positive and negative version. So 0 is right in the middle of the number line. So we know, like for 2 example, 2 can have a positive and negative version, root 2 and negative root 2. But 0 doesn't have that. Only 0 times itself will be 0. So this is only going to have one answer. If I square root both sides, right, square root both sides, right, square root both sides, these are going to cancel out, which is why I only have x plus 1. And square root 0 doesn't have 2 versions, it's only equal to 0. So again, it doesn't have a positive or negative version, it's just going to be 0. So minus 1 on both sides, x equals -1, and that's going to be our only answer. Okay, over here, this completing the square, we actually have more tiles than we need. We only want this little bit to complete the box. So we're going to minus 5 on this side to get rid of the extra tiles. Right? But if I minus 5 on the left side, I need a minus 5 on the right side as well. Minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we minus 5 on both sides. Leaves me with this new equation, 9 minus 5 is 4, and 0 minus 5 is -5. But now this is a box we can factor. Let's see, we know that -2 times -2 is going to be +4. The -2 times x is a -2x. So everything in the box works out. So how can we solve this? Let's see. We can square root both sides. So let's see, square root both sides. Right? And notice any issues about square rooting both sides here? So can we take the square root of a negative number? There's no number that times itself is going to be negative, because again, a positive times a positive is positive, and a negative times a negative is positive as well. So there's nothing that's going to make a square root negative. I mean, there's imaginary numbers, but we haven't gotten to that yet. So for now, we're going to assume that this one has no solution. All right, no solution. Okay, so what's the process for completing the square? So we split the x in half. So we have the same for the base and height. All right, how many x tiles do we need? Again, we look at the half of the x box and see how many tiles we need. And why do we like to have a perfect square? Having a perfect square is really helpful because it's really easy to square root both sides and solve for x. And we're going to do that when one side's a perfect square. All right. It makes it easier to square root both sides and solve for x. Okay, moving forward. So here, let's look at this example. So Jessica wants to complete the square with x squared plus 5x plus 2. But the first thing she notices is that 5 isn't an even number. All right, how can we split this in half so that we make a square? So she decided to use brute force. She decided to cut the tile, and she put 2.5x here and 2.5x here. So how much more do we need to complete the gap? So this is a 2.5 gap times a 2.5 gap. So we need 6.25 more tiles to complete the square. So it turns out the quadratic equation doesn't always have to be an even number. If it's an odd number, we could just cut it in half and still get our box, right? The same on both sides. So adding 6.25 to both sides, -2 plus 6.25 gets to 4.25. And here we can factor this. Let's see. X times x plus 2.5 plus 2.5. All right, now that we solved, notice that x plus 2.5 times itself can be written as a perfect square. And we want this as a perfect square so that we can square root both sides. So let's square root both sides. We have x plus 2.5 equals square root of 4.25. And it also equals the negative version as well. From here, we can minus 2.5 on both sides. Oops, that should be a 4. And the same thing over here. The negative version, 4.25 minus 2.5. So here we do. We square root of both sides, and then we got rid of everything next to x. So here, let's look at completing the square without having our tiles. So imagine we have 6 x's here. How much are going to be placed along the sides? Even though you can't see the box, can you imagine half of it goes here and half of it is going to go on the side? So we're going to do 3 on each side. Oops, sorry, 3 on each side. Okay, and then from there, we know we have a 3 by 3 box, so we need 9 tiles altogether. Here we only have 7, so we need 2 more to complete the square, right? Plus 2 more to get 9. Plus 2 more, we get the equation x minus 3 squared equals 2. All right, here we have 10 x's, so let's go and split these to both sides. 5 go on both sides. All right, so if we make a 5 by 5 box, we know we need an area of 25 in here. So we only have -3, so we actually need to add 28 more. Notice that the -3 and 20 are going to cancel out, and then we end up with that 25 area that we wanted. All right, and then we can factor it and then solve the equation. All right, Hopefully you guys can kind of see the structure for completing the square. We want to take the x tile, split it in half, and then see how many more units we need. So let's go and solve these equations. So let's see. Here we can split this into 14x and 14x. Okay. And we know that 14 by 14 should be 144. 14 by 14 is 196. But we only have 52. So we actually going to need 144 more. So notice if I add 144 more to both sides, I'll have the 196 that I want to complete my square. And I can factor this into x plus 14 and x plus 14. All right, let's go and solve. Let's square root both sides. Square root 144. Square root 144 is a perfect square. It's actually going to be 12. So it can be either positive 12 or negative 12. And minusing 14 on both sides, x either goes negative 2 or x equals negative 26. Okay. Over here, let's go ahead and complete the square. Again, even if it's an odd number, we can still split it in half. So half of it goes here and half of it goes here. All right, 2.5 times 2.5. That's going to be 6.25. But we only have 4, so we need a little bit more to complete the full box, 2.25 more. And then from here, we can split it, x plus 2.5, x plus 2.5. And now that we split it up, we have a perfect square, and we can square root both sides to solve for x. X plus 2.5 equals, again, square root of 2.25 is 1.5. Or it can be the negative version, negative 1.5. All right, minus 2.5 on both sides. Oops, negative 1. Or x equals negative 4. All right, next example. Here we can go ahead and complete the square. So let's see, we have negative 16x, so let's put half of it here and the other half here to make our box. All right, we know that an 8 by 8 section makes 64, but we only have 17, or actually we have nothing here. So we need to add 64 on both sides. So again, we had nothing there, so we add 64 to both sides. So now we have a complete box. And we know that if we complete the factor, all right, all the parts are correct. X times x is x squared. X times negative 8 is negative 8x. And negative 8 times itself is 64. So now we have the same thing times itself. We have a perfect square. And we can square root both sides. Oops. Let's do x minus 8 equals square root of 81. It can either be 9 or it can be negative 9. So plus 8 on both sides. X equals negative 1. Right, and last example, let's go ahead and solve this last one.